This will be the second lecture on habitat use in animals. In the first lecture we talked about scramble or exploitation competition, and in this lecture we're going to talk about resource defense or territoriality. When resources are defensible, territories develop. This is the case when the benefits of exclusive use outweigh the costs of the defense. And the cost can be substantial. For example, it takes lots of time and energy to defend territories. And this can be associated with elevated stress hormones and testosterone, which are oftentimes associated with lower immune functions, which can lead to increased mortality. There can also be increased mortality associated with just the behaviors of territoriality itself. Flying around or running around defending a territory can increase your likelihood of being seen by predators and attacked by predators. And again, we talked about how group foraging can sometimes reduce predation risk, the dilution effect, detecting predators sooner and more efficiently. You're giving that all up in a territorial situation. So yes, you may be getting sole use of a resource, but that resource better be pretty valuable. Here's a study that demonstrates the energetic cost associated with territorial defense. This is an experimental study in which they increase the testosterone in Yarrow's spiny lizards. You do this with implants, little plastic rubber tubes packed with testosterone powder, and that leaches into the circulatory system of the lizard. And you can see that it does affect the behavior of the lizards. Here, normally, the control individuals, the unmanipulated individuals, would have a peak of activity early in the morning and then drop their activity later in the day. But the implanted individuals, on average, have a much higher daily activity rate. And this comes at a cost. It turns out that this takes a lot of energy. And so control individuals are kind of the middle purple line shown here, and it shows you their survival rate in days after the study begins. These are the unmanipulated individuals foraging on just the normal resources they have in their territory. Now, the individuals that were given the testosterone implants were broken up into two groups. In one group, those territories were supplemented, where they had extra food. And in this case, they actually had really high survival rate, actually higher survival rate than the control individuals. But with this extra testosterone, if they didn't receive supplements, they had significantly lower survival rate, indicating again the cost associated with trying to maintain this increased rate of territorial activity. It just can't be supported with the natural resources associated with a normal territory in this species. Territoriality is very common in songbirds. Male songbirds benefit in a couple of ways from territorial defense. It tends to lead to increased fitness by raising more young, because you are protecting the resources needed for feeding those young. But by having a large territory, it helps to sequester your female away from rival males that may try to steal copulations with your female. Let's talk a little bit about the pattern of territory formation. Territories oftentimes are highly variable in their quality. So you have high quality territories and then low quality territories, and then habitat that's just not even sufficient. It's not even worthwhile to have a territory. And in these circumstances, not surprising, the highest quality, rich habitats are the ones that are chosen first for establishment of territories. And so this figure here is demonstrating that. The initial competitors to an area, let's say that this is a migrating species that comes in to help to try to establish territories. Well, they're obviously going to do that in the higher quality territories first. But as the number of competitors arriving increases, eventually it's going to reach the point where there are just no more high quality habitats. And so the number of territories in this habitat quality are not going to increase. Subsequent competitors arriving on the scene are going to have to try to establish territories in lower quality habitats. Once these are saturated and there are no more habitats that are even suitable for territory formation, the benefits do not exceed the cost, then we see the establishment of floaters. Floaters are individuals that are typically non-breeders, basically just trying to exist for the period of time, breeding season perhaps, as a non-breeder trying to make it into the next year by utilizing resources in marginal habitats, as in scramble competition, or to sneak into territories of conspecifics and utilize those resources when possible. Let's look at an example of a species that has the potential to use territories of different value and look at how fitness differences can be used to understand the pattern of habitat choice. Aphids induce the formation of galls at the base of leaves, and these structures are used for parthenogenetic reproduction inside these galls, and then the young aphids use these galls as a feeding resource as they develop. And where you establish your gall has a huge effect on the size of the gall and the size of the resources that are available for producing young. And so there's extreme competition for establishment in the best locations on the largest leaves. And this is accomplished through these kicking battles. So the best option is to have the base of the largest leaf. If you can't get that, what do the losers do? Okay, if those territories are already established. Well, they could share a large leaf and take an inferior location, or they could try to have sole use of a medium-sized leaf. If they can't do that, well, maybe they'll share a medium-sized leaf, or maybe have the sole use of a small leaf. And what we see is that the settlement patterns are associated with the expected fitness at each site. So the data in the table here we can examine to see this pattern of establishment. The largest leaves, 14.6 centimeters, are the ones that are preferred initially by arriving females. These females will establish galls in the basal position. That's associated with the highest fitness. The second best spot is on medium-sized leaves, again in this basal position. The third best position is the establishment in a basal position on a small leaf. So basal positions are the best. The bigger the leaf, the better. After these territories are saturated, subsequent females will take a secondary position on either a large or a medium leaf, basically a more distal position away from the base of the leaf. These have comparable fitness. And then the last option available to female is to take an even farther distal position away from the base of the leaf. And this is definitely the worst fitness option, but it may be all that is left to these kind of lowest quality or latest arriving females. There have been quite a few territorial manipulation studies that demonstrate this idea of preference for certain habitats and how habitats of different quality are established in different orders, but have also shown that individuals, when given the opportunity, will upgrade. So birds will establish territories first in the highest quality territories. They'll then move to less high quality territories as a second option. But if something happens and an individual that's occupying a high quality territory disappears, the individuals in the lower quality territories will fight to gain access to this higher quality territory. That's what has been shown with great tits. Here's a picture of a gray tit. Again, it's a European basic version of our chickadees here in North America. The preferred habitat is prime forested habitat. These are occupied first and associated with really high fitness. 92% of these nests fledge young. Hedgerow habitats represent a suboptimal habitat and are only established after the forest habitats are saturated. And this is because they have much reduced fledging success. Only 22% of these nests fledge young successfully. So hedgerow birds will quickly move into forest territories when forest residents are experimentally removed. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that resource defense only occurs in breeding territories. It can also occur in non-breeding territories. This is particularly true in migratory species like American redstarts, a type of warbler. These birds winter in Jamaica, and the highest quality large males will defend the best wintering territories, which are represented in Jamaica by black mangrove forest habitats. In these habitats, there are better food resources, so these individuals stay healthier, accumulate fat quicker, and are able to migrate back to the breeding grounds in the spring at a much earlier date. And that's what the figure here is showing, the black mangrove red line. These individuals are leaving Jamaica much earlier than those birds that are occupying the secondary growth scrub habitats. Now, there are a couple of different benefits to these males defending the best wintering territories. By leaving early, they can arrive on the breeding ground and establish their breeding territories in the highest quality territories because they get there first. Secondly, in lots of bird species, there's a general pattern. Those that breed earlier tend to have higher reproductive success. So you're getting the better territory, you're able to breed earlier, and for both of those reasons, it can increase your fitness. Some territories are defended and territories can be dropped in a relatively short time period depending on the economics, the cost-benefit ratio. This can vary depending on variable resource value, resource distribution, variable predation threats at different times. And so we're going to kind of investigate how short-term territory defense decisions can be made in the context of nectivorous birds like hummingbirds. Hummingbirds, sunbirds, bellbirds, these are all examples of nectivorous birds that are feeding on the nectar resources associated with flowers. Territory defense in these species can be very costly, and the benefits of exclusive use of nectar resources has to outweigh these costs of territorial fights and flights. So this bird has to determine, in certain circumstances, is this the optimal territory to defend, or should it expand its territory to defend these additional resources that are farther away? Is this going to be beneficial in the long run? Well, let's kind of look at this from the perspective of extremes. When resources are too scarce, the benefits are simply too few for the increased costs associated with the defense of widely scattered resources. So if this hummingbird is trying to defend this territory and it sees an individual on the opposite end of its territory, it has to decide, is it worth flying all the way over there for a very small resource anyway, and it's going to cost me a lot of time and energy to do that. So in this circumstance, it's probably just not worth being territorial. Now let's look at the opposite. What if you are dealing with a superabundant resource? In the case of superabundant resources, again, it's just not usually worth it. First of all, there's just so much resource here. If it's superabundant, there's no need to defend something that you can't use all of it anyway. The other thing is, this is likely to be a big magnet to draw potential intruders. And by the time you run off one intruder, two more will come in to use the resource. So in this situation, territoriality just isn't going to be feasible, and it's probably best just to drop territory defense and go into exploitation or scramble competition. White-fronted bee-eaters will defend foraging territories in the non-breeding season, and some groups will abandon their territories during the nesting season and will simply forage near the colony in a non-territorial scramble competition manner. But if you look at the capture rates of territorial and non-territorial birds, the territorial birds end up catching many more insects per hour than the non-territorial birds. So why would they ever make a decision to drop their territories? Well, they only do so if their territories are just too distant from the colony, so that the travel time and the prey delivery rate just really won't, those costs overwhelm the potential benefits of defending the territories. And the groups that do maintain the foraging territories during the breeding season are those that happen to have had foraging territories that were near the location of the colony. One pattern that's seen in a lot of species that practice territoriality is that the territory owners, the residents, tend to win more often than not when challenged. And this has been termed the resident advantage. You can kind of think of it as like home field advantage. So this begs the question, why do challengers usually lose, or why do the residents tend to always win? Well, there are a couple of several potential answers to this. One of which is that, well, maybe the residents are just bigger and badder. They're more dominant, and that's how they became a resident in the first place. And if you look at these data on bee wolf wasp, it tends to bear that out in this species. What they did is they looked at the size of territory owners, measured them, removed them, and then waited to see a new replacement come in and take over that territory, then measure the size of that individual. And basically what you see in most cases, the replacement was smaller than the original territory owner. And in only 5 cases were they of comparable size. But in no case was the replacement individual bigger than the original territory owner. Another potential explanation may have to do with how healthy the territory residents are. Maybe by having access to the territory resources, they've been able to improve their health so that when they are challenged, they will have a fighting advantage over the challenger. And in that case, they may be able to fight for a longer period of time and win what we call the war of attrition. The war of attrition is associated with outlasting your competitor by winning the waiting game. And damselflies do these chases, these flight displays where they chase each other when they're fighting over a territorial resource. And the damselfly residents are not always larger than their challengers. And that's what's shown here. If you look at the thorax weight, the winner minus the loser, sometimes the winner is larger, but a lot of times the winner is smaller. But invariably, well, with very few exceptions, the winner has much higher fat content. And it turns out that the reason for that is these individuals with the higher fat content are the original residents, and they've been able to utilize the resource associated with that territory, and therefore can last longer. They have a bigger tank for flying around in these flight battles and can win the war of attrition. Perhaps the residents know they have more to lose. Maybe the residents win even when they appear to be inferior individuals because they've learned how to get the most out of their territorial resources and are willing to fight harder for that. Now, there are a couple of reasons why that may be. Well, one, they may be older individuals. They really don't have anything to lose by fighting for the resource. If they get injured, well, they're about to die anyway. And their last chance for getting some additional fitness is to maintain the control for this resource. This fits the pattern for egg fly butterflies. If you look at their age, the older they are, the more likely they are to persist in a battle for maintaining control of a territory. In a similar vein, maybe the residents have higher perception of the resource value and fight harder. They have been in these territories, they know how to get the most out of it, and they realize if they have to establish a territory somewhere else, that there's going to be a learning curve and inefficiency associated with that. Well, one prediction of this is that fighting intensity should be correlated with residence time and how much an individual has been able to learn about the resources in their territory. This pattern has been demonstrated in a variety of studies on birds and insects. Here is data from blue tits, again, in which the time an individual has been allowed to establish a territory, as that increases, their duration and their willingness to fight also increases when they're challenged. Territory residents benefit from a stable relationship. This is another pattern that is seen in territorial species. Early in the formation of territories, that is a very costly behavior. Territory boundaries once they're already established and agreed upon by the individual neighbors, then there's little energy wasted in subsequent boundary disputes. However, if you lose your territory or your neighbor loses your territory, you have to start again with rebuilding these understandings. So what we see is territory owners oftentimes will work together to run off intruders. That's why it's called the dear enemy hypothesis. Territory owners are typically each other's enemies, but when it comes to repelling an outsider, they're all in it together. There's benefits to everyone to make sure that this individual doesn't take over one of their spots. This has been demonstrated in fiddler crabs. Sometimes individuals will help their neighbors repair a challenger, again because they've established these stable relationships with their owner, and better the devil you know than the devil you don't. So let's review. In this lecture we've talked about territoriality as opposed to in the previous lecture where we talked about scramble competition or exploitation competition. The benefits of territoriality include the exclusive use of territory resources and the potential to guard mates against rivals. But there can be substantial costs that have to be overcome, like time and energy of territory defense, the increased stress associated with that, and the potential to increase predation on territorial owners. We talked about how territory formation occurs in specific orders, where high quality territories are established first, and then going to lower and lower quality territories being established, and eventually once all of the suitable habitats for territories are saturated, then we see the formation of a floater population. But individuals will shift it to higher quality habitats when given the opportunity, when higher quality territories become available. Not all territories are just associated with the breeding season. Non-breeding season territories exist, and we gave examples of that with wintering warblers, bee-eaters as well. And territoriality can be flexible, and short-term defense is seen in species like nectivorous birds, depending on fluctuations in resource distribution and value. We talked about a couple of terms associated with territoriality studies. One of these is the pattern of resident advantage, where resident individuals tend to win far more contests when challenged than challengers. Why is this? Perhaps they're just the dominant individuals in the population, and the reason they're territory owners is because they are dominant, and they're just reinforcing that pattern. Perhaps they're healthier individuals and they can win the war of attrition, and the reason they're healthier is because they've had access to the resources associated with these territories. Perhaps they fight harder. Maybe they fight harder because they have less to lose, they're older, and this is kind of their last chance of gaining fitness. Or perhaps they have a better understanding of the territory value and they don't want to lose that advantage by the necessity of trying to establish a new territory somewhere else, and so they're going to fight harder for that. We also talked about the dear enemy hypothesis, the idea that there's mutual benefits among territory owners in a community to work together to maintain stability of ownership, so that nobody has to waste time teaching the new kid on the block what the rules are and where the territory boundaries are.